So with Next.js or anything in the Jamstack, one of the hardest things is trying to persuade maybe a client or somebody else that using it would benefit them, especially when it comes around marketing teams or content people who need to be able to edit their posts on the fly, or somebody who is less developer focused needs an easy way to edit the content. So I'm going to show you TinaCMS. Now this is by the people from Forestry.io, and they have built this product that allows you to essentially edit blogs or pages on the fly using either Git or Strapi, and they have some cool stuff coming in the future. Now TinaCMS allows you to essentially log in using a provider such as Strapi, which I'm going to show you today, and then edit on the fly, save it, and when you reload the page, everything is already saved in the content manager and your users can see it. Now, TinaCMS is really powerful, and I'm going to show you the surface of what it can do. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, let's go check it out. So to begin this tutorial, what I did was I took the original Strapi Next.js application and just stripped out anything that was related to Strapi. So now we just have a base layer that works the same way as it did if you've watched my previous video, which I'll link above. And if you want to know how to set up Strapi, that's also available in the playlist. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the ability to essentially edit our blog post and also switch from the original Strapi API requests to use GraphQL, which makes it easier to sort of combine and also manipulate the data that we need. So the first things that we really need to do is install all the packages that we need for Tina and anything else that we might want. So we're going to do a yarn add here, and we're going to add React Tina CMS editor. We're going to add the React Tina CMS inline, React Tina CMS Strapi. We're also going to switch to Remark, so we need to install Remark and Remark HTML. And obviously we need the most important part, our main star here, TinaCMS. So once these have installed, I'll meet you back here. And that is wrapping our application to use TinaCMS, as well as Strapi. So just like other providers or anything like that, you need to wrap your app in these sort of features to allow Strapi and Tina to work seamlessly in your Next.js application. So we do need to import a few things. So we need to import Strapi Media Store, Strapi Provider, and Strapi Client. And those are going to come from our React TinaCMS Strapi. And what this does, it gives us the ability to essentially play around with Strapi and give us the ability to essentially update anything that is in the Strapi store or in the media store, and then save them and have them actually work up there. So now we have React CMS. We also need to import TinaCMS, and that's going to come from TinaCMS, and we also need the Tina provider here, so let's install that too. So now we have TinaCMS and Tina provider. On top of that, we need to also import use CMS, and that's going to come from TinaCMS. And then we also need to import use memo from React. So use memo from React. And all of these features together give us the ability to essentially do whatever we need to our blog posts. Say like we misspelled a word, or we need to change the media at the top. It gives us the ability to do all of those things without struggling. So one thing I will note is that with this video, I have a global style sheet that is already pre-populated with some styles because, as I've said in previous videos, I believe it's up to you to decide how you would like to style your page, and this is more about the TinaCMS implementation. So one thing we need to do is use memo to essentially set TinaCMS up and dictate whether or not TinaCMS is enabled or disabled. Obviously, if it's enabled, we want the user to be able to take what is there and edit it and then hit save and then go back to their day. But we obviously don't want somebody just randomly on the internet to come up and start editing those files. So to do that, we're going to create a constant here called CMS, and we're going to use the memo function from React. And we will create something here called new TinaCMS. So new TinaCMS. And inside of here, this is where we're going to set things. So we're going to have a toolbar, and that toolbar is going to be at the top. And the only time we want it to be available is if the page is in preview mode, which is a Next.js functionality, and not any other time. So you can set that by setting page props to preview. And on top of that, we want it to be enabled. So we'll just say page props.preview. And this page props is passed through Next.js. So as you navigate the page, you can have this available on every page. In this example, we're only doing the blog post, but essentially you could edit any page if you set it up that way. So the APIs, we're going to be using Strapi here, but you could use just Get and have it all based in Get and handle it that way. But for this example, we're going to use Strapi. So all we need to do is do a new Strapi client. All we need to do is do new Strapi client and then pass in from our environmentals our Strapi API, which we've used previously, which is just next public underscore Strapi API URL. And that is the URL to your Strapi site that has GraphQL available. So make sure that you have GraphQL enabled on your site, which I covered in a previous video. And then for the media, it's also going to be from this URL, but we're going to do new Strapi media store. And then we're going to process the environmentals here and drop them there. So now that gives us the ability to essentially use this as a way to edit the page and then upload that back to the Strapi provider. And then just to make sure that this only runs when it needs to, we'll just use a set of empty square braces. So now we have this CMS, we actually need to use it. So what we're going to do is create essentially a wrapper around this component here with Tina, and that will allow us to essentially say, use this CMS, and then we can handle the provider by either selecting on login, or we can set it to on exit. So inside of here, we're going to change this to return. And inside of return functionality, we're going to do Tina provider, and then CMS equals CMS, like so. And this gives us a way to wrap everything in our website with this CMS up here. And that gives us the ability to touch any page that is delivered by our Strapi. Then we can use Strapi provider, which we imported here at the top from this React TinaCMS Strapi. And we're going to take two properties here. We're going to use on login, and we're going to just say enter edit mode, and then on logout, we'll just exit edit mode. And for now, we don't have these functions, but we will write them in a second. But just bear in mind that when somebody enters the login and gets it correct and can edit it, and then everything else inside of it. And then we'll have an edit button here, like so. And this edit button is just going to allow you to essentially click it to launch edit mode. There are other ways that you could do this, but I just wanted a simple edit button that could handle it for us. And then finally, we're going to put in our components that are anything that is produced by Next.js will pass through here. And then we'll use the spreader with the page props to handle any properties that we might have. So now we've successfully returned this. We need to create a enter edit mode. We need to create an edit button, and we need to handle what happens. So for enter edit mode, we're going to set this equal to a function, and then we're going to do something in this function. Now, right now, we don't actually have any API routes that could handle this. So we're just going to copy and paste this for now, and we're going to just change this to exit edit mode. And then let's write a couple of API functions. So the first API function we're going to write is preview. And what this does is it allows us to preview the data and then set the preview data to the new preview data we might have created. So in this API, we can just create a preview.js. And then all we need to import is the Strapi JWT. Now the Strapi JWT is going to come in when we've actually logged in to our Strapi instance through the front end. Then what we can do is create this preview handler. So we can just do preview handler equals the request and the response. And inside of here is where we can do something with the preview data. So we're just going to set const preview data equal to Strapi underscore JWT and then request cookies Strapi JWT. So now we have the Strapi JWT, we can actually do something here. So when we hit save, underneath we can just say set preview data to preview data. And then we can just set our status to 200. And then we can just stop this API request by using end. And then we can just export default function preview handler. So now we have this preview handler. Let's actually talk about what it's going to do. And we can just flip back to our app here and say, okay, if this is the enter edit mode here, we can essentially say to it, return, and then fetch that data that we just asked for. So API slash preview, and then then, we're not going to have any callback here, but what we're going to do is do window.location .href equals window.location .pathname. And that's it. So essentially what we're doing here is we're going to be saying set the location to the path name. So, and then we'll just essentially end up refreshing the page available to do some preview work. Then what we need to do is do the opposite of this. Like what happens when you exit out of the preview? So let's create another API endpoint here and just call it reset-preview and say reset-preview.js. And all we're going to do here is do a simple API request and say request response, and then response.clear preview data, and then set the status to 200 .end, and that's it. So essentially what we're doing here is using this clear preview data, which is something that's available in Next.js. And essentially what it does is it turns off and goes back to the version before you had preview mode. So it just shows you what is live on the website, which is perfect for when you want to make an edit, hit save, and then you are back in the live mode that everybody else sees. So now we have the reset preview. Let's just add this to our exit button here. And we can just say return, fetch, and then API slash reset preview, and then then, and we can just reload the page. So window.location.reload will reload our current page, and essentially what will happen is we'll get rid of all of the preview data and then reload the page. One thing to note is that it's /API there. So now we have a way to enter the edit mode and exit the edit mode. The next thing we need to do is actually create an edit button that does something. So for the edit button, let's create an export const edit button, and then we can equal to a function here. And what we're going to do is say const CMS equals use CMS. And that gives us access to know whether or not the CMS is enabled or disabled, so that we can render the button depending on the features and also how the onClick works. So create a button here, and we'll give it a class name, and the class name will just be TinaCMS button, and that's because I got some styles in the background. And then we need the onClick handler here. So the onClick is going to equal, and we're going to say CMS enabled. And if it is enabled, we'll say CMS.disable, else CMS.enable. And that'll give us the ability to either enable it or disable it, depending on if it's already enabled or not. And then the button name, we can conditionally render this as well. And we can just say CMS enabled, stop edit, otherwise edit the block. And that's it. Now we have a button that will work depending on what the use case is and allow us to edit or not edit the block. So let's talk about this whole thing again and make sure we understand truly what is happening. So at the top, we imported a few things from the React CMS from Strapi, and that's the media store, the provider, and the client. Then we imported TinaCMS, the provider and use CMS from our TinaCMS, and then we're using Memo. So we have this CMS, and we're just saying create a new TinaCMS and say if the toolbar or it's enabled is based upon this props preview, and then the APIs we're using is Strapi, and then the media is also coming from Strapi. Then our whole application is being wrapped in TinaCMS, and we're also wrapping it in this Strapi provider. And based upon whether or not it's logged in or logged out, we'll have edit mode or not. And then we'll give it an edit button that will sit at the top. And then we'll provide any components below. So now we have this, we can actually use it in our application. But before we do that, let's actually pull in the data from our blog posts and show that to the user so that we can see what Tina looks like on screen. So here we are in the index.js, where the heart of our application is done. So these are previous remnants of our Strapi app. So what I've done is created a posts here, and the post returns a card for each article. And each article has an image at the top, a title, and then the category. And then is one giant link that links out to our slug post, and that slug post displays all the information. So what we need to do in our index is actually get the data from Strapi. And the way we can do that is by importing a GraphQL wrapper from TinaCMS. So we can do import fetch GraphQL from React TinaCMS Strapi. And now we can use this to fetch the data. So to do that, we need to create a get static props. And the way we're going to use get static props here is we're just going to fetch the data and then use that as a way to show what is on screen. So to do that, you do export async function get static props. And get static props allows you to build these pages at build time instead of fetching them on the client data. So it makes your site super fast and allows you to essentially, if you have like a blog post that you only update once a week or once a month, you won't have to worry about doing like a build or anything like that. You can handle that all in this functionality. So inside of this export function get static props, we're going to say const, and we're going to say posts data, and then this post data is going to equal await fetch GraphQL, and then we're just going to create a simple GraphQL request. So the first thing we need to do is tell it where we are grabbing this from. So you can just do process env and then strapi API URL, which is our strapi URL that we used in our previous example. And then inside of here is where we're going to do a query. Now we have two options here. We could do this in the strapi GraphQL, or we could just write it out knowing what pieces that we need. So in this example, I already know what I want, so you can make these queries as you so fit. But for our example, we're going to do query. And inside of that query, we're going to do articles. And inside of those articles, we're going to do title. We're going to do published at, and that'll get us the publish date. We're going to need the slug, and then we're going to need the category name. And then we're going to need the author. And we're going to take the name, the picture, and the URL. So now we have this. We're going to also need the image, and the image is the cover image that we use from Strapi. So we're going to need that. So just put URL here, and then we can hit save. And now we have this post data query that we can use anywhere that we like. So now we have to use this preview here and decide whether or not we're going to just show the articles themselves, and that would be if you were just a returning user or a user of your blog, or if we're going to show the actual data and the preview data to the user. To do that, we can write a quick if statement that says if it's preview, then we can return something, and then else we'll just return something else. So for the basic returns, we're just going to put props here, and the props are going to be articles, and the article is going to be post data.data.articles, and then the preview is going to be set to false. And then for our own swiftness, we can write a revalidate query here that says revalidate 1. And this means that we'll just revalidate the staleness of the data based upon the user. So the way that this works, and I've talked about this a few times, but I want to cover it again, is if you have a new blog post, the first user that enters the site after the blog post is published will see the stale data and see not the new post. But the next visitor, or if they were to hard refresh their page, they would see your latest post. And this is basically a way to incrementally, statically generate your data and gives you the ability to essentially handle being able to have sort of a hybridish blog posts where it's always available with new data, regardless if you're building this statically, which we are in this example. So it's super useful, and I really, really like the feature. So now we have this preview, we need to talk about how we return this. So we're going to return it in a similar fashion. So we can just copy this article part here and say, we're going to return this. But we're also going to return the word preview, and that means that it will be true. And then we're going to use a spreader here to essentially handle preview data. And what the preview data is going to do is give us a way to edit and show that preview data without having to worry about what's happening. So now we have this. This part of our site is actually built. So we'll be able to use this now because we're passing in these articles. and we can use that to show the user. So let's see what this looks like from a TinaCMS standpoint. So I'm going to launch the application and I'll meet you on the other side. Okay, so here we are on the website, and as you can see, we have our 2 blog posts here that have come from Strappy, and we have the edit blog button. Now, if we click this, it'll ask us to log into the Strappy account. Well, we don't currently have a user enabled to do this, so I'm going to quickly log into Strappy and show you how you can set up a user ready for authentication. So here we are in my Strappy instance here, and as you can see, under collection types, we have users. And what we can do here is add a new user. So let me just say the user will be J Perkins. We'll leave the email, and then we'll set a really secure password. And we'll also set this to confirmed, so I don't have to confirm it on my own, and hit save. So now we have this user, and if we go back to our users, we'll see that it is available and confirmed. So now that we've added our user, if we click the edit button, and then type in the user that we created, our super secure password. When we hit submit, we'll see the page reload, and now we have this options up here to like change and edit and use the media manager. This page I haven't set up to do anything, but in theory we could edit and add a different thumbnail here, or we could change the blog post itself, add, take away, etc. So I'm going to click this stop edit button, and what will happen is the page will reload and the preview data, if we had some, disappears. So now let's actually create the blog post page that will handle our blog posts when we click this button, and then we can edit them on the fly. So now we're inside of our slug.js file, and we need to add some stuff up here to handle everything that we want to happen. So we're still using the images from our original components, and that image just returns a Next.js image that has been set to a particular width and layout and loading style. So that hasn't changed, and it is fairly standard here. So inside of our slug, we need to import some stuff. So we need to import our WYSIWYG editor. So to do that, you just do inline WYSIWYG. So the first thing you need to import is our inline WYSIWYG. So to do that, you do import inline WYSIWYG. And that's going to come from React TinaCMS editor. And this gives us the ability to essentially edit things on the fly. We also need to import the fetch GraphQL that we used previously from React TinaCMS Strappy. And that's so that we can grab the blog posts and then handle them. And then we're going to have some other features here. We need to use form. We need to use plugin and use CMS from TinaCMS. And then finally, we need to import our inline text, inline images, and inline form from Tina so that we can use them as a way to edit them on the fly. So inline form, inline text, and inline image. And those are going to come from React Tina Inline. And then we can hit save. So now that we have all of these cool features, we need to actually create our posts. And so let's go ahead and handle our GraphQL really quickly, and then we can show you how flexible and powerful Tina really is. So in the world of Next.js, when we're using static props, we also need static paths as part of our functionality. So we need to do both an export default function for get static props, and then we also need one for our get static paths. So what we're going to take in for our static props will be parameters, which we'll shorten to params, preview and preview data. And then we'll just open and close this out for now. And then for our static paths, which is the part that basically builds all the different paths that you have so that they are available and quickly being able to be retrieved, we need get static paths. And then inside of here is where we'll do our first piece of work. So we're going to do the same thing we did before. So we're going to have post data. And that's going to equal await fetch GraphQL, which comes from Tina. And then we're going to set in our process.env.strapi API URL. And then we're going to make a query, which is basically the same style of query as we had before, except from all we're going to return here is the slug, because that's the only part we actually need to give them. We need to tell Next.js all of the different paths that we have. So slash post1, slash post2, slash post3, etc., etc. So to do that, we just open a set of parentheses here and say query articles slug. And that will return all of our posts slugs. And that's all we need. Then we can say return and then say paths is equal to post data.articles. And then we need to map over each one to get the posts. So when we write this query, what happens is that every single article is returned. So imagine you had 100 articles. You need to map over them to get each individual parameter. So to do that, you can just do .map and then say post, and then use the arrow function here, and then say return params, and then slug post.slug. And that will give us the ability to essentially take this return here and say, for every single post, please return the data. And then one more thing we want is the fallback. And the fallback is a way of saying, hey, if we didn't build this, can we retrieve this post? And for this example, we're going to set it to false. So it will just 404 and say, hey, this is not found. So now we have this paths here. What we can do is use it in this props to create the data that we need. So the way that this is going to work is similar in the beginning. So we're going to use post data is equal to await fetch GraphQL, and then we're going to again process.env strapi API URL. And then we're going to use that to make a query that takes in the parameters that we used previously. So this is returning the params of slug, and we're going to use that param slug to essentially grab the correct post data. So to do that, set your backticks up again, and then inside of this query, we're going to say query articles where, so this is a where clause that says where the slug equals params.slug. And then outside of that, we can ask for the data that we need. So we need the ID, we need a title, we need the published at, we need the slug, we need the content, we need the author, name, picture for the author, and we're obviously going to need the image, which surfaces at the top, and then URL. And then we can hit save, and then we can edit what we want to do with this data. So outside of this function, we can say const post is equal to await post data dot data articles, and then we just want the first one in the list. Now it should never ever be a part where we return multiple variants, but just in case, we'll set that to we want the first in the array. And we can say if preview return props post, and then the post will be ... post, and then preview is set to true, and then preview data, and then if we hit save, now we have our preview here, and this says basically if we're in preview mode we want all of this, else we should just return the regular data. So we can just say return props post ... post, and then underneath that we can just say preview false. So essentially what we're doing here is saying, hey, if it is preview mode, we're going to use it, else we'll just set this to not be the preview data, and we'll just have the basic queries. So now we have those queries, we should do some stuff with CMS, Tina style, and it's going to make your life so much easier when you want to edit a blog post. So what we can do here is say, hey, instead of just taking in the post, what we're going to do is we're going to set the post to initial post and then preview. And what we're doing here is essentially saying, hey, if it is the initial post and it's in edit mode, we can do something with it. Otherwise, we'll do just the regular posts. So underneath this post here, we're going to write const CMS is equal to use CMS. And that gives us access to use the Tina data that we created originally. And then we're going to create this form config. And the way that this works, essentially, it takes the ID of the blog post, a label, such as blog post, and then the initial values, which will be our initial post here. And then on submit, what we're going to do is asynchronously take those values and then mutate the values of this blog post as a whole, and then return that data to us so that once we hit save, we'll actually have the new version ready to go. And then if it fails, we'll just, put an alert up that says it fails. Otherwise, we'll just say it was saved successfully. And then that way we can inline edit this, and then afterwards we can essentially save it, and then it will be available to everybody right away. So to do that, inside of here, we're going to write this word form config. And then this form config is going to take the ID, it's going to take a label, it's going to take the initial values, and it's going to take an on submit. So let's fill these out. So the ID is going to be this initial post dot ID. And then I noticed I can't spell, so initial is spelled like this. There we go. Then the label, will just set this to post. Then the initial values will be the initial post. And then finally, we need to do something with this on success. So the way that it works is the on submit is going to submit this back to our Strapi instance. So to do that, we're going to take some values, and these values are going to be the values that we edit as we go along. I'm going to take those, and we're essentially going to set those in a mutation. Now, a mutation is essentially a way of doing like an update to the values using GraphQL. So using the async functionality here, we can say const and then save, and then we can set this to whatever we need to. So in this example, we're going to use the word mutation. I'm going to say update article mutation. So that's the name of the mutation. And then we're going to take in some variables here. So $ID is going to be ID. $title will be a string. $content will be a string. And then finally, the cover image ID will be an ID. So those are the variables we're going to take in. Then what we actually need to do is do the update. So we're going to say update article. And we're going to say input and then where. And the where clause is going to take the ID, so ID colon $ID, so where this ID equals ID. And then the data will be the title, and that will be $title. The content will be $content, and then the image will be $cover image ID. So now we have this part, the update article. After we've updated it, we're just going to article ID, and then we can hit save here, and this will give us what we want. So now we have this save. What we can do is say underneath that, we can say const response equals await CMS API dot strappy dot fetch GraphQL, and then use the save mutation that we have here, and then say the values will be ID values.id. The title will be values.title, and then the content will be values.content, and then the cover, then the cover image ID will be values.image.id. And then we can just handle the response from there. So we can just say if the response.data, then we can just say it works. So we'll just do CMS alerts. So it gives us the opportunity to essentially alert somebody success and say changes saved. Otherwise, we can just say, uh-oh, something went wrong. So we can just do another CMS.alerts.error this time and say, uh-oh, something went wrong. And then finally, after all of this is done, we want the fields to be an empty array. So that was a lot. I mean, that was a serious amount of information and a lot to take in. So let's just talk about what we're doing here and then, you know, what we need to do to sort of finish this and actually get this to work. So this giant piece here, we're taking in this CMS and saying, hey, we're going to use CMS. So we want access to all that great stuff from Tina. And then we've created this configuration file, which we can't actually use yet, but we will use in about 2 seconds. And essentially says, these are the fields that we're going to use. We want the ID and we want the initial values to be what is presented from Next.js, from Strappy. And then if we've made any changes on submit, we can save it by passing in the ID, the title, the content, and the cover image. And then we're going to update that article using those values. And then if the response has data, so we're going to make that call to GraphQL. And if it has data, we'll just say, hey, it worked. Else, we'll just say something went wrong. So now what we can do is underneath here, but before our return, we can create a constant state here called post and form. And then we can use form. And then we can pass in our form config. So now we actually have the ability to use this by using this form here, which creates a form and allows you to update the properties. So now what we need to do is use the plugin, which is the hook for the CMS plugin. So underneath here, we can just write the words use plugin and then pass in the form. So now we have this. Now we can start creating the rest of our posts. So if the preview, we should just use the preview data. So we'll just put preview equals preview. Then what we can do is wrap this inline form across the whole thing from above main to allow us to essentially edit anything in here. So we can use the inline form here. And then the form is equal to the form here. And then the initial status is going to be set to active. And that basically means it will be active if we're using this preview. So we can take this inline form and we can wrap it all the way around, except from our first div. So now what we can do is essentially do things like inline image and pass in the media, or we could do the title and make that editable. And the way that this works is here, I've left a couple of this empty div here. So what we can do inside of here is say, I want the image to be at the top, but I also want it to be able to change. So you can do inline image, give it a name, and the name is going to be image.id. And then the upload directory, which is a way for us to upload the directory, we're just going to set this equal to a set of callbacks with just a slash here. And what that will do is it'll upload it to Strapi as needed. And then we can pass in the media here. So we can say media.id. And now that gives us the ability essentially to now show the image to somebody, but also edit it as we see fit. So in here, we just need to actually display it to the user. So we can use our images component here and say image equals post.image. And now we have this fully editable image that we can use anywhere we want. Now underneath this, I also need a title. So let's just call an H1 in here. And this H1 is going to have an inline text, which means now we can edit this inline. And we'll give it a name of title. And that will be the inline text for the title. And now we can actually essentially use the inline WYSIWYG to handle the bulk of the document. So right now we have this remark markdown source and it's post.content. So what we can do is wrap this in an inline WYSIWYG and then give it a name of content. And you're probably wondering what's happening with all these different names, and I will explain that in 1 second. So we can set the format to markdown because that's what we're using here. And then we can put this inside of it like this. And now what we have is the ability to edit everything. And then we can just leave this the same because we're not going to allow them to edit, say, like the author. And that is the end. So let's explain a bit more. So you've noticed that I keep calling these things specific things, title, name, etc. And you'll see that these values actually match what I'm giving the name of this to. So if you see here, values.id, values.title, values.content, values.image.id. And if you look here, we have image.id. And then for the WYSIWYG, we have the name content. And the title is named title, and those match the values. So essentially what we're doing is passing in these values back from the form to our GraphQL request, allowing us to edit it. So this is a way to essentially do this on the fly, even though you're using Next.js, which has static properties. So now we should be ready to launch. So let's go ahead and launch our blog, and I'll meet you on the other side. So here we are. I've opened the first blog post, and as you can see, it's not exactly pretty, but it definitely does work. So now if we click this edit button and then type in our username and password for Strapi and hit submit, what you'll see is the page will reload, and now we have the ability to change the names or forms. So we can just change this to My Awesome Blog. We can change this to the story of James, and then we can edit some stuff down here. Maybe we delete this line, and then if you see up here, it says form status unsaved changes. So if we click save here, you'll see the changes have saved. And then if we click stop edit, you can see that all of this is still here and this is no longer in preview mode. So if we hit return and come back, you can still see that these are all the same. So now you can edit this on the fly and then make some more changes, hit save, and now it's available to the next person. So there we have it, guys. A small part of TinaCMS. It is really, truly one of the most powerful things I've seen come out of the Jamstack, and I'm super excited to see what they bring in the future. If you did enjoy this video, make sure to drop it a like, subscribe, comment to help me with the algorithm, get those subscriber numbers up, and get more people watching Next.js content. Until next time, see ya!